Tonight's new episode of Watson came with one of the most emotional and intense stories of the entire season, and this week's episode, called Boying Time, really focused on how far Dr. John Watson will go when a patient's life is on the line. The story started with a heavy reminder of everything that happened between Sherlock Holmes and his older brother, Mycroft. Everyone believes Sherlock is dead, but the show makes it clear that Mycroft still carries a huge amount of anger toward him. Sherlock's final move before disappearing ruined Mycroft financially. And Mycroft ended up losing his company and almost everything that mattered to him. So with Sherlock gone, Mycroft was left with all that bitterness and no one to aim it at. That is how Watson became his main target. Mycroft decided to push Watson into doing what he called aggressive research. For Mycroft, aggressive research simply meant research that could make him billions and restore his empire. But Watson refused. He didn't want to take shortcuts, break rules, or do scientific experiments that could harm people. He wanted to help patients, not make Mycroft rich. Because of this refusal, Mycroft pulled all the funding for the Holmes Clinic. This was devastating because the trust that ran the clinic was tied to the Holmes Foundation, and Mycroft was the only person in charge after Sherlock's supposed death. Watson suddenly found himself running a clinic with no money, no safety net, and a brother-in-law figure who was basically threatening to shut everything down. But even with all this happening, Watson kept focusing on his patients. He believed that helping people came first. This was shown clearly through the case of Casey Zink, a 23-year-old former baseball player who came into the clinic after dealing with months of painful symptoms. Casey didn't have insurance, and he had been struggling in every way possible. He lost his baseball scholarship after an injury. He had no money for proper tests, and he was living out of his car. The free clinics he went to couldn't afford to run MRIs or anything advanced, so he was left suffering without answers. Watson agreed to treat him without charging him, even though the clinic itself was out of funds. They ran an MRI and discovered the horrible truth. Casey had a tumor in his spine. Mary delivered the news, and things became even worse when the foundation refused to cover Casey's hospital stay. This was the moment Watson realized he had no choice but to find money somewhere else, even if it meant swallowing his pride. Since Mycroft wouldn't help, Watson went to billionaire Joseph Bell, the flashy, ego-filled creator of anti-aging generation, age for short. Bell was obsessed with the idea of living longer, staying young, and beating time itself. He talked about climbing mountains at age 100 and becoming a father at 115. His entire life revolved around proving he could extend human life, so Watson made a deal with him. Watson would help Bell with his obsession and run tests for him, and in return, Bell would cover Casey's medical bills for a month. Watson wasn't proud of this arrangement, but he was desperate to save Casey's life. At first, everyone assumed Casey's cancer could be treated the traditional way: surgery, chemotherapy, radiation. But nothing worked. The tumor couldn't be removed because it was fused tightly to his spine. Chemo didn't affect it at all. And radiation wouldn't help because the tumor wouldn't respond. It was something none of them had ever seen before. Mary, Watson, and the fellows were shocked when they realized the cancer was not natural. It was genetically engineered. Someone had created this cancer on purpose. Casey, hearing this, called it mortal cancer, and that turned out to be painfully true. It grew extremely fast, didn't weaken, and didn't stop. Soon, Casey went blind and couldn't move. Watson and the team searched through Casey's past and discovered he had taken part in multiple paid medical trials just to survive financially. One of those trials was run by a company called Primal Biotech, which pretended to be researching vitamins. But the company wasn't real. It was a shell company secretly belonging to Bell's egg. Bell had been experimenting on young people to test a formula he believed could extend life. Instead, the formula caused uncontrollable cancer. And the worst part, Bell himself had injected the same substance into his own body. He thought it was safe. He thought it would make him stronger and healthier. He didn't know he had given himself the exact same cancer he gave to Casey. Adam managed to steal a sample from Bell's fridge and tested it against both Casey and Bell's DNA. The matches were undeniable. Both had the same deadly cancer growing in their spines. This realization changed everything. Watson now had 2 dying patients, one innocent and one responsible. The team worked nonstop to come up with a method that could force the cancer to collapse on itself, basically tricking the cancer cells into destroying each other. Eventually, the treatment worked for Casey, but Bell wasn't so lucky. His cancer mutated too quickly. By the time Watson confronted him, Bell was already too far gone. Watson agreed to treat him only if Bell financially compensated Casey for the suffering he caused. Bell agreed, but even then, the treatment couldn't save him. Bell died, leaving behind a legacy of destructive ambition. Casey survived. With Bell's money, he was finally able to restart his life. He bought a new car, and for the first time in months, you could think about a future. Watson felt a sense of relief knowing he saved someone who truly deserved another chance. But his problems weren't over. Mycroft returned, this time furious and suspicious. He had figured out the truth. Sherlock was alive. He demanded Watson reveal where Sherlock was hiding. If Watson refused, Mycroft threatened continuing funds and even jeopardized the entire clinic. Watson was now caught in an impossible choice to betray his best friend or risk losing the clinic that saved lives like Casey's. Another emotional subplot involved Stevens. He shared with Ingrid that she believed he was depressed, and although he didn't want to admit it, he knew she might be right. Stephens had always been scared of therapy because of his father's history with depression. His father saw 4 psychiatrists and still ended up in what Stephens believed was not an accident, but something darker. He never told anyone that until now. Ingrid was the first person he trusted enough to share this part of his past. It showed how lonely Stevens really felt and how afraid he was of becoming like his father. He would rather sit and talk to hospice patients than sit with his own emotions, and that was heartbreaking to hear. The episode came to an end with Watson staring at the heavy choices in front of him. He now knew Mycroft could destroy everything, but he also knew the truth about Sherlock wasn't something he could betray. The episode left things on a tense cliffhanger, making viewers wonder what Watson will choose in the coming episodes. This episode had a mix of drama, science, emotional chaos, and suspense. It really showed Watson's heart, his dedication to patients, and the impossible situations he gets pulled into because of the Holmes family. Buying Time was the perfect title because throughout the entire episode, everyone was literally trying to buy more time. Casey with his life, Bell with his ego, Mycroft with his revenge, Ian Watson with his loyalty to the people he loves. It was one of the strongest episodes of the season, giving a deep look into how far Watson is willing to go to protect people, even at the cost of his own safety. And with Mycroft closing in on Sherlock's secret, the next episodes are set up to be even more intense.